we ask people all the time, do you want to live to 120? And everybody thinks about the last 120-year-old person that they saw, and they're like, no way,
Yeah.
But if I could tell you that you feel like you do now, and you're productive and healthy, and you're cognitively alert, and your muscle mass is allowing you to do everything you want to go do, and you get to, continue to pursue whatever interest you have, would you want to live to 100 or 120? And most people say, yeah, absolutely, I'd want to live to 120.
This is the Business of Advice podcast, where we help good advisors become great business owners. Welcome to a special episode, and I say that because this episode is going to touch on a very important topic for business owners, entrepreneurs, leaders, but in some ways may not be as traditional as most of our episodes. Today, I am joined by Dr. Bill Kapp, who is a dynamic entrepreneur. We're going to talk about that. He's founded several healthcare startups, ranging from surgical centers and hospitals to health record systems, and we're going to talk about kind of his newest venture. And that's how I got to know Dr. Kapp, through his role as the CEO of Fountain Life, which is a longevity clinic that I've been a member of now for a little over 2 years, I guess. So we are going to spend some time today really focused on, as entrepreneurs and leaders, how we can be the best version of ourselves physically. So Dr. Kapp, welcome to the Business of Advice.
Well, thank you for having me, Cody. I really appreciate the time and look forward to the talk.
Well, I'm going to start off by, and I'll throw it, I want you to share a little bit of your journey just in healthcare, and tie that into maybe business also, because you've done some fascinating things. But I'll preface this by saying we had you come speak. So I've been a member, as I said, my wife and I, of Fountain Life. First heard about you all through Tony Robbins, who I know is a partner and investor in it. And Tony's like, yeah, you got to prioritize your health, right? Spend a little money on that. And so my wife and I have had some really good results. We had you come speak at our leadership summit in Boston in December to kind of our top advisors. And I think you blew them away. I said I think we've had 50 plus advisors now sign up to become members. And we'll talk a little bit maybe at the end about what membership looks like. But I think it was one of those things for everyone. It's this realization, as an entrepreneur, as a leader, as a business owner, you're striving and working so hard. And a lot of times you tend to sacrifice your health, because of all the other demands on that. So I'll just set the stage we're going to talk about how to reverse that course a little. But before we jump into some of that, maybe just share your background in healthcare and then kind of the things you're working on now you're excited about.
Yeah, sure. So, I appreciate once again the time. My background, I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I did a fellowship in sports medicine. I was very heavily involved in research early on in my career in molecular genetics, and always looking at all the newest healthcare innovations as they kind of came through. And it was about 6 years ago that we started to see some of the early changes and some of the new technologies that are going to really fundamentally reshape everything we know about healthcare. I had built a group of about 9 hospitals in my career outside of my orthopedic practice. I also built some surgery centers and some imaging centers, a health records company like you spoke about. But all of that was all predicated on what we refer to today as sick care. Meaning that, today, what we really are going to require in order to change healthcare is a paradigm shift. We've got to get away from this idea of waiting until you get sick and then treating you versus, treating you early when you may, for all intents and purposes, feel healthy. Yeah. And so I think that was the genesis of what we've done. And about 6 years ago was when I started to see this advanced technology that was coming, everything from genome sequencing to whole body imaging, which we'll talk about, and a few other tests and lots of other tests that would give us a really good snapshot for the very first time of what your body had going on inside it, even though you may not have a single symptom, and ways to start to reverse that. And so we built a company called Longevity Performance Center that was the predecessor, or the precursor, I should say, to Fountain Life. And it was about 3.5 years ago that we started the company. It was almost 4 years ago that Tony Robbins and Peter Diamandis came to visit us in Naples, Florida, where we had started the first Longevity Performance Center, and saw what we're doing and really got excited about the concept. And that's how we launched Fountain Life.
Yeah, and it's been neat to see. Tony wrote his book, Life Force, which is where I first read about it and reached out to him. And he's like, yeah, let me connect you. And that's how you and I first met on there. I think it maybe dig a little deeper on this, and maybe you can use this to talk even about some of the things that you all do at Fountain Life. But you said this well, right? I think traditionally it's like, hey, when I have symptoms or I'm sick, then I go visit the doctor. think this is really about, how do we be preventative, predictive, and some of the things that are going to happen there. Maybe just talk about how that mindset is starting to shift. It's slow, because even some of my good doctor friends who they may listen to this, so I won't say their name, but even when I talked about that I was going down the Fountain Life and all the things that you all do, they're like, they're just going to find things that aren't really wrong with you, and so it's even that mindset in medicine is not quite there yet. But maybe talk about just like some of the things that you all are doing and why you feel like this preventative or predictive is going to be such a big game changer.
Yeah, and I think one thing to bear in mind, even with my physician colleagues, is that, medicine undergoes evolutions, and meaning that, when we started, the very first doctors, and God knows how far back, we started at I call the macro level, meaning that we, clean up the sewage, wash your hands, get rid of the rats, I mean, this is all kind of basic public health, but that was kind of what we did for a really long time in medicine. And then as science started burgeoning into medicine and we discovered the microscope, then we figured out about microbes and microorganisms, and that led to antibiotics, and then we discovered viruses, and all of that's great. But the reality was, by the time we figured out, the macro and the micro, and now we're at the molecular, we really doubled life expectancy. So versus 150 years ago to today, life expectancy is double what it was. And so in the process, we not only have doubled life expectancy, but the things that used to kill us, meaning, getting eaten by a tiger or having an infection, those are gone now. Okay. And so what we have is largely what we treat today as chronic disease, which are the diseases of aging. So 80% of what we treat today is chronic disease. So medicine is really undergoing a migration into what I would call the next generation of medicine. And one of the reasons that doctors are slow to adapt is because there's a thing called the clinical latency gap, meaning the time technology is available to most doctors use it is about 15 years. And unfortunately, it mirrors their training programs. And so a lot of the things that we do, which is cutting edge, and by the way, everything we do is FDA approved, but the reality is most doctors aren't aware of it. And putting a lot of technologies together in the preventive medicine platform, they're just unaware of it. And they're also taught in medical school scarcity, meaning that don't order the test unless you're really sure it's going to be positive. Well, the reality is today, because 80% of what we treat is chronic disease, and chronic disease generally does not become symptomatic until it's late stage, meaning you don't have chest pain until you have a lot of plaque in your arteries. You don't have, a lot of symptoms from your abdominal tumor until it's pretty big. You don't have, symptoms from diabetes until you're spilling, sugar into your urine. I mean, the reality is we wait until symptoms occur, and that's what medicine's been predicated on. It's a question and answer that you have with your doctor that comes up with 80 to 85% of the diagnosis. And that Q&A is the basis of how we diagnose you, and it's based on symptoms. So I like to use the analogy of aircraft because I'm an airline. I was a pilot, and my dad was an airline pilot. But you wouldn't probably get in a jet if the pilot just walked around the outside of the jet and says it looks good from here. You would really like him to do the run up on the engines, check the system so that you don't have a problem at 40,000 feet. But today, where our physical exam is, which is where most of our prevention is, it's a walk around. Right? It's a walk around with a 200-year-old stethoscope, which is when it was invented. And I can't hear the plaque in your arteries with a stethoscope. And I can't see that tumor in your kidney that's asymptomatic, even if I mash on your belly. I can't do that. So the reality is we need to use the modern tools that are available today to start to detect disease while you're asymptomatic. And one of the reasons physicians are skeptical of this is because the technology has moved so fast in the last 20 years. It's moved incredibly fast. And it's moved just as fast as Moore's Law and everything else. But the problem is the educational system doesn't keep up. And for the average physician today, we know there's between 4,000 and 7,000 medical articles published every day. So there's no way to keep up, really. And realistically, any doctor who thinks they're keeping up is really fooling themselves. And unfortunately, with my colleagues, as we make this transition to prevention, it's people tend to be a little down on what they're not up on. And everybody always says, oh, you're going to get all these false positives. Okay. Well, the reality is, in our hands, our false positive rate is about 0.1%. So the technology is very, very good today. We don't get a lot of false positives, but we do get a lot of true positives. And we can certainly talk about that. So I think that's the challenge. So what do we do? We use all the latest imaging technology that we can find. We do a full body and brain MRI on every single person that comes through, and we analyze it with artificial intelligence that gives us even more imaging data that we can utilize. And then we do a very advanced cardiac test where we put a little dye in your vein, and we can take a very nice image of your heart with a CAT scan, and then we analyze that with artificial intelligence. We do a whole genome sequence, which we analyze with artificial intelligence. We do advanced blood biomarkers that are using artificial intelligence. And so, once again, it's not that your doctor is going to get replaced by artificial intelligence, but we fully believe your doctor who's not using AI is going to get replaced. But what this allows us to do is get a very comprehensive picture of your health. We look at your microbiome, we look at toxins, we look at all the things that could potentially be impacting your health. And it gives us a very good overview of what your baseline is. And from that baseline, we work to optimize you.
Bill, how far out? So using some of those tools, and I may even talk through a few of the things that, my experience going through there, but when you're using those tools, how far out can you see some of these major health events, right? So let's say, cancer, stroke, heart disease, like what is the projection of that, I guess?
Yeah, so we commonly see things at stage 0 and stage 1, definitely stage 1 for heart disease, stage 1 for prediabetes, stage 1 for cancer. That's what we catch. And then the reason we catch it early is because treating it early is so much less expensive than treating it late. Plus, the outcomes are so much better. Mm-hmm. If you catch a stage 1 cancer or stage 0 cancer, you've got a 95% chance of being cured of that. It may be surgical excision. You may never have to undergo chemotherapy or radiation if it's small enough. It may be that we just treat you very aggressively with radiation. But the point is we have a much higher chance when the disease burden is low. And then with things like cardiac disease, once we see that you have plaque in your arteries, and by the way, any plaque is too much plaque, right? So we would want to then show you how to reverse that. Same thing with type 2 diabetes, same thing with early cognitive decline. That you don't want to wait until you can't remember your car keys.
Yep.
Because by the time that happens, you've already lost a lot of brain volume.
A little too late.
Yeah, and it's hard to put brain volume back, but we'd like to catch it and show you what your projections are, and then show you how all the other facets of your health can improve that. Because we are at our core a longevity company, but we look at longevity a little differently than most in that we believe that in the next 10 years, there will be technology to extend the healthy human lifespan. But what we have today and what we know of today, we know that with what we can show you today and where the state of the art of the technology is today, you can probably make 98 healthy today with what we know. It's just the problem is that that's not taught in med school. Because in medical schools, unfortunately, doctors aren't trained to keep you healthy, and they're not paid to keep you healthy when they get out in private practice. And as a matter of fact, only about 30% of medical schools even have a class on nutrition, which is a real basic thing. So what you have to understand is there's nothing wrong with what your doctor does, meaning that if you need a coil in your brain or heart surgery or you need a knee replacement, that's great. Okay, they do a magnificent job at all of that. But when it comes to predicting your health and trying to keep you healthy and training you, and doctors just aren't trained or paid to keep you healthy unless you have a private concierge doctor or a functional medicine doctor that you can out of your pocket. And part of that is the training system. Part of that's the reimbursement model. And really, quite frankly, we only reimburse for sick care at a high level. We do not reimburse to keep people healthy.
What's interesting is I've done, you and I have talked about this, I've done the Mayo Clinic executive physical 3 times over the, past decade or so, which, for most people is considered one of the best. And my experience here was completely different. And to what you said, and I don't mean this as a negative to them, I think any step someone can take to be proactive on their healthcare is good. But I feel like the technology, the things that I was able to glean from this that I wasn't, I guess the good news is I didn't have anything major, right? So that was the positive, but there's also this kind of comfort level of knowing, like you said, there's not some little tumor growing in there that you haven't seen yet. But I will say even some of the things for me that were interesting, 4 or 5 years ago, I had melanoma found on my leg. When you all did the gene testing at Fountain Live, I have a gene that makes me highly susceptible to get melanoma. It was one of the key triggers, right? So even as a simple thing, it had been 5 years because I reached the point where they're like, you don't need to come in every quarter. With Dr. Kingsbury, it's like, I don't know. I would probably continue to go in a little more frequently, just knowing now that you've had it and you have this gene that makes you, more susceptible to having it. One of the ones you saw this when I shared kind of my numbers in Boston, but my liver fat changes, it went from like, I don't even know what this means. You may be able to talk to it a little bit, but like from 16% to like 3% this last year when we did our checkup. And this is where I was going to head with that question. Like a lot of that is not so much, and maybe you can speak to this. Like it's not like you went and put me on a bunch of medications. A lot of that is diet, supplements, stuff like that. So can you talk through just how you then kind of build a game plan coming out of, that full day of testing that you do?
Sure. I mean, what we're really doing with that full day's testing is number one, getting a baseline, and then taking a look inside your body for all the things that we can't see from the outside in. I mean, no different than an airline pilot would do in running up the engines, or a mechanic would do in, x-raying the wings of an aircraft to make sure there's no structural abnormalities. So once we're sure that you don't have an aneurysm, you don't have a cancer, or things of that nature, and like in your case with elevated liver fat, that's a great job you've done in lowering that, because elevated liver fat today is the number one cause of liver transplant in the United States today. It's no longer alcoholism. And that is strictly dietary and exercise, and can be easily reversed, with diligence. And I say easily, it's reversible is the point, right? So that you're not going to have to deal with that long term. But the reality is most people are unaware of that, because most people don't know what their liver fat is. And by the way, you're not getting that checked at your doctor's office, and that's not really paid for. And if you want a free physical, which is all the insurance companies like to give you right now, that's great, but they're not going to check you for that. Okay. Yeah. They're not going to do those advanced scans. And that's really where the opportunity lies. When we studied our first 1,000 patients that have been through our process, the reason we are in this game in the first place is we certainly want to help people. That's important, but we want to fundamentally reshape how we do healthcare. Because if we don't find a way to lower costs of healthcare in the United States, it's going to bankrupt the entire country. We're currently spending $4.5 trillion on healthcare in the United States. We spend more than any Western democracy or any country, period, worldwide. The next closest country to us is Germany in terms of percentage of GDP. We spend 20% of our GDP on healthcare in the United States. To give you an idea, that we spend about 7% of our GDP on the military. Okay, so just to give you a rough estimate of how many dollars are being spent on healthcare, Germany is second, and they spend 11%. And matter of fact, we spend more on healthcare in the United States than the entire economy of Germany. So when you start to realize what we're spending money on, what you realize very quickly, and what we saw in our data is that by detecting things when we were finding them early and treating them then, or reversing them at that point, versus when they're normally found, meaning when they're symptomatic and treated the old traditional way, you can lower healthcare costs by close to 80%.
Wow.
So it's a huge savings. And by the way, I think most of us would rather be healthy than sick. And if you could put you on that path and you had a roadmap on how to do that on a routine basis, I think most people would opt for that. Unfortunately, they're not given that roadmap right now.
Yeah, and for everyone listening, part of we're going to dig into a few more things. Anyone who listens to this, I want them to think about prioritizing their health. The skeptic in me would say, like, it's such a big business. There's not a lot of incentive for people to change it. Which is part of why you're going to have this uphill battle. But it also points to this idea of like, if you can, pay attention to some of these things that are happening, you can really change your. I think your health over longevity, and maybe that's a transition question. Like you talked earlier about the idea of life expectancy. We've seen that grow, dramatically. I think throw out kind of these last few years with COVID and some of the effects that it had on longevity. That's been on a steady climb. With technology, artificial intelligence, some of the things that you all are using to be predictive, like where do you see life expectancy going? But then, I think the other scary thing there is as that increases, if we're not being more proactive on our healthcare, like it's gonna make that system even more expensive.
Yeah, so I think today, the first people are definitely living today that'll live to a healthy 120. I'm pretty confident of that today. There's a large body of people inside the longevity industry right now that are well-known scientists like Dr. George Church, Dr. David Sinclair, that believe that, there may not be an upper limit on life expectancy. But the reality is nobody wants to just live long and survive to an old age. I mean, when we ask people all the time, do you want to live to 120? And everybody thinks about the last 120-year-old person that they saw, and they're like, no way,
Yeah.
But if I could tell you that you feel like you do now and you're productive and healthy and you're cognitively alert and your muscle mass is allowing you to do everything you want to go do, and you get to, continue to pursue whatever interest you have, would you want to live to 100 or 120? And most people say, yeah, absolutely, I'd want to live to 120. People act like, this is, well, we're going to burden the population, we're going to have population explosion. Absolutely not. I mean, we're right now seeing a population implosion
Yep.
worldwide in most Western countries. We don't have a birth rate that's going to keep up and with replacement. And so I tease with my kids who are millennials, and I say, nobody's going to want to take care of me when I'm old in a nursing home. They're going to go work for Apple or Tesla or whatever the latest tech company is, but they're not going to work at the nursing home. And so the reality is there's going to be we already are tight on jobs. That's not going to necessarily improve dramatically anytime soon. And so I think the reality is if you are, if you are 50 or 60 years old today, you need to be thinking about your health long term, because you need to be proactive on your own health, and don't expect that there's going to be a magic cure for what ails you. You're going to have to do the work to keep yourself healthy, but you're really going to need to educate yourself on how do you stay healthy longer. One of our advisors, Dr. Eric Verdin, who is the CEO of the Buck Institute, which is the #1 aging institute in the United States for research, well, he will tell you 98 today, healthy 98 is entirely achievable with what we know today. We don't need an advance in gene therapy to get there. And what our premise is and what we do at Fountain is our first step in getting you on that longevity pathway is let's avoid having you die from something that we can detect and treat early. It's like the first step.
Yep.
Let's make sure you don't have anything wrong going on that we can fix and treat early, so that you can then go on to make that 98 healthy.
I think the interesting thing, so many people, the majority of people listen to this podcast are financial advisors, kind of our audience, but, that is a job that you can do for a long time. There's just a couple things, health is probably the only thing that's really going to impact that, right? You're not out doing a ton of manual labor necessarily. Cognitive is a big part of that, right? How your mind stays sharp throughout that. But it is one of those things that I think you can do a long time. And it's why I think, prioritizing this is a big part of it. We've talked a lot about the idea of proactive medicine. Well, let me say this, because I've had this question. Like, some people have told me, like even advisors after you spoke, they've said like, well, in a way, I almost just don't want to know, right? Which seems crazy to me. But I do think there are some people who have this like anxiety over like there may be a ticking time bomb in their health. How do you help people manage like the mental aspect of that, part of it?
So first of all, I think it's important to understand that you do want to know early rather than late. Just like you'd rather your pilot find out about the problem on the ground versus at 40,000 feet. Okay. I mean, it's a very simple analogy, but part of that is also this idea that we can't fix things or we can't reverse disease. And by the way, cardiac disease reversal is not taught routinely in medical school. To be able to, and I would tell you, our average patient or average member that comes through, we see about a 40% reduction in plaque in their arteries in about a year. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we use some, regular medications. Obviously we use it's a multifaceted approach to that. But the idea that you can reverse early cognitive decline, you can reverse heart disease, you can reverse type 2 diabetes, even if you're insulin dependent. We've got a lot of people that are off all their meds now. And you can also reverse, as you can say, with your liver fat. I mean, there are things we can do to improve. The problem is 90% of the medications we give people today are symptom suppressive. They don't address the root cause. And you would really like to know the root cause of why you're having whatever condition. And the point is, we don't look at a root cause. And the root cause could be genetic, in your case, like for instance, with the melanoma, but it could be dietary. It could be a toxin in your bloodstream. It could be you're eating too much fish and you've got a mercury toxicity. There's all kinds of things that are not being routinely tested for by your doctor, because your doctor is largely focused on waiting for you to get to be a symptomatic patient And then they start to go look for the problems and not necessarily look for the root cause. For instance, if you can't remember your car keys, chances are they're not going to do a brain MRI right off the bat.
Mm,
Okay, they're probably going to give you some medication that can maybe help you with your thought process. If you have early stage Parkinson's, they're probably going to give you Aricept or something like that to try to improve that. I mean, there's just different things that they can do, or I should say, not Parkinson's, but Alzheimer's. There are different things you can give people, but a lot of those are focused at the symptom. And what we want to know is what's the root cause. We know the root cause, we can probably find a way to do that. And then, by the way, there are so many studies going on all over the world today. There's all kinds of really interesting opportunities for treatments that are innovative, that may be on the cutting edge that you can participate in. But you won't know that because the standard physician is so overwhelmed in their office, particularly primary care doctors.
yeah.
We always say, the average primary care doctor, you get a 10-minute visit, he treats a computer for 7 and you get 3, right? And so you usually get one problem and you can't really, do what we do because our doctors spend over an hour to 2 hours going over your results with you and explaining to you what's going on so that you have a real good grasp. And ultimately, AI will do a lot of that work for physicians. But
Yeah.
once again, I don't think doctors are going anywhere anytime soon.
Maybe the most important, you and I were talking about this before we started recording, but one of our advisors, who's a good friend, heard you in Boston, signed up early January, went in for his full, testing, full body, and ended up having one of his main arteries was, I think, 85, almost 90% blocked. And honestly, while we're recording, probably having open heart surgery as we talk. So I've told people, him being proactive literally probably saved his life. And he would say the same thing. I think what he told me is that the doctor said, had they not found this, probably would have been dead within the next 3 years. So just being proactive, for anyone who listens to this, if you haven't done something to be proactive, just do that. So, I mean, it really can be a matter of life and death. You never know what's going on in there.
So we know that 70% of people who have a heart attack, will never have a symptom prior to having a heart attack. And we also know that half the people who have their first heart attack never have a symptom. And half the people half people have their first heart attack don't survive. So we're just not very good at picking up disease today. And it's still the number one killer. And you need to use the technology to go find it. And you don't need to go to the cath lab. You can actually do this test where we bring you in as an outpatient, put some dye in your vein, and we do a quick CAT scan of your heart. Once we do that, we read it with artificial intelligence, and we can show you every single artery in your heart and how much plaque you have, and whether you have good plaque versus bad plaque. I mean, all plaque is not necessarily bad, but the point is it can be calcified and stable or uncalcified and not stable, and different ones have different levels of inflammation associated with them. But the point is that once you have the information, it changes what you do. And we have a lot of our members that have been through, and they might have been bothered with. So, for instance, one of our members called us and he was having chest pain. And this is prior to getting this test. We had just gotten this test approved. This is an FDA approved test. It's only about 3 years old. And we literally turned around and had just started doing the test. And he called us. He was having chest pain. It was in the middle of COVID. And he said, "What do I do?" We said, "Well, come into the office here, and we'll check you." He didn't want to go to the emergency room. He was worried about getting COVID at the emergency room. So we brought him into our center and we did the test. And, lo and behold, he didn't have anything wrong with his heart. I mean, his coronaries were clear. It was probably anxiety. But on the flip side, if he'd have gone to the emergency room, he might have gotten COVID, number one. Number two, they would have had to do testing on him, and he would have admitted him to the hospital for 2 days. They would have ruled out enzymes and everything else. And so instead of getting a $1,500 test to rule this out, he would have had a $30 to $40 to $50,000 hospital bill, and he still would have walked out and maybe not known exactly what was going on. Right.
So still had anxiety.
Still have anxiety because he wouldn't be able to see his coronaries, right? Because they probably wouldn't have cathed him if he had a negative enzymes. And anyway, bottom line is knowledge is power, particularly when it comes to your health. And once you know your heart, and by the way, we always tell people, hey, you see this all the time. Before engaging in strenuous activity, you may want to talk to your doctor. Well, if you want to go hike Mount Kilimanjaro and you're 60 years old, you might want to get your heart checked before you go, especially if you have a family history of heart disease. And wouldn't it be nice to know that you had totally clear coronaries? Wouldn't it be nice to know that you didn't have some other problem that would preclude you from doing anything that you wanted to do physically? And I think it's really important as we move forward that, when you have that information, now you don't have a limitation in your brain about what you can and can't do.
One of the things at Fountain Life, I know it's a lot of executives, a lot of business owner entrepreneurs, people that are living, I would say, fairly high stress lives. So I'm going to ask this not quite last question, but before we move to the lightning round, a little open ended for you. But like when you look at the people that are coming in, and just maybe in general, if you could offer like 1 to 2 pieces of advice or recommendation, I'm going to give you two on things that people should start doing, what would those be? Like, are there some common things you're like, hey, if you would just start doing this, this, and this, like it would be a game changer for you?
Yeah, so we when we look at longevity overall, the number one impact on longevity is actually blood sugar. So having a tight blood sugar control is really critical. And there are lots of ways to get there. Certainly diet is a huge part of that. But one of the biggest things you can do to promote your health outside, we believe in cardio. We think cardio is important, but muscle mass is absolutely critical. It is the number one factor that's linked to healthy longevity and reduction in cancer rates, reduction in inflammation, all of that. So I tell people, get in the weight room, weight train, get your muscle mass up. And so that involves a host of things. You want to make sure you're hormonally optimized. You want to make sure that your hormones are not in the bottom, they're in the top. And you want to make sure that you're getting plenty of protein in your diet and things of this nature. It's kind of baseline building blocks for muscle mass. But muscle mass is number one. And when you have a really good muscle mass, you actually probably won't have diabetes because muscle is one of the biggest sinks for blood sugar, and your muscle likes blood sugar. And so all of that is really super important. And I think when you look at people who are healthy and live a long time, they actually have a lot of muscle mass. And those are probably the two biggest takeaways. And I would say the other third one there is actually sleep. Sleep, we are finding unbelievable associations. People who are sleep deprived have higher cancer rates, higher issues with mental issues in terms of we see early cognitive decline in people who don't sleep well, and there are lots and lots of ways to improve your sleep. We certainly give a lot of that advice. You can measure your sleep now with different devices, and then in addition to that, there's a really good book out there by Dr. Matt Walker, and it's called Why We Sleep. And it's a great book. It's on Amazon. It's definitely worth the read. There are a lot of really easy sleep hacks you can do, everything from how you prepare the bed and how you prepare your room to turning the temperature down. I mean, there's just real basic things. And the reason you want to sleep is because when you go into that deep sleep, your brain basically almost squeezes itself. It's almost like squeezing a sponge, and it kind of cleans out all the toxins. And so all of the toxins that are accumulating in your body and in your brain all day, the brain undergoes kind of a rinse cycle at night. And it's really important. That only really happens during deep sleep. So you want to be able to measure that, and there are lots of ways you can optimize that.
It's interesting. People have asked me like, hey, what were some of the changes or adjustments? And one of the things I think with, Fountain Life, you have nutritionist coach, health coaching, all that's kind of part of the package there. I said, they got my protein take. I'm supposed to have 150 grams of protein a day, which isn't the easiest thing to do, right? So you got to supplement a fair amount of that. Heavier weight training. So I've always weight trained some, but I think we've increased, just the weight and trying to build more lean muscle mass has been a big part of that. But yeah, even the sleep stuff, I've worn Oura Ring for a while, but we have like an 8 sleep bed, or bed mattress that keeps your bed cool and just helps a ton in sleep. So some of those are great. Okay. Flip side to that question. Are there, a few things, it could be 1 or 2 things that you would encourage people to stop doing that just have consistently led to these poor health outcomes?
Yeah, I think, yeah, well, so obviously, smoking, that goes without saying. I mean, it's probably the worst thing you could possibly do for yourself. I think the second part of that is probably, trying to eat as many natural foods as you can, not eating processed foods, and eating the colors of the rainbow. And these are all really important. And they're not important just for the nutrition component, but it's actually the fiber that's in that fruit and in those particular vegetables, because that's what feeds the healthy bacteria in your gut, and that has a huge impact on your health. So I think those two biohacks are super, super important. I think, in terms of, avoidance, and then, moderation, certainly, alcohol it's going to definitely impact your sleep. And you definitely will see that. You can be as little as 1 or 2 glasses of wine, and you can see it in your sleep cycle.
Hmm.
So you can kind of get this idea. We don't really believe there's probably a healthy amount of alcohol, and it doesn't mean you have to stop drinking entirely. It just means there's probably not a really quote therapeutic dose of alcohol that is considered healthy for you. I mean, I know there's been a lot of that information, but a lot of the data is coming out now. It's just probably is not. But it doesn't mean you and then also I think it's really important though, but you shouldn't like stop living. Okay. You don't want to be a monk. You want to your friends won't like you if you're not social. And so does that mean you have to have a bender? No, but what it means is, social interactions with longevity are really super important, and your
Yeah.
relationships with people around you are really super important. And so, you need to be realistic. And we really encourage people on the 80-20 rule. If you can do things 80% of the time correctly, then 20% of the time you can have a little laxity. Life is not meant to be a chore. It's meant to be enjoyed and lived. And, as you start to incorporate these small changes, it makes a huge difference. But like I said, I think one of the things is, our food system is not very healthy for you. A lot of the processed fast food, if you can avoid that, goes a long way in starting that journey toward better health.
That's good. Okay, final question I want to ask you before we flip to these quick lightning round questions is, it is more from the business owner entrepreneur side of what you've done. Usually when you think healthcare, when you think doctors, it's kind of a sterile, boring environment. I think what you guys have done at Fountain Life that I try and share with everyone, even our advisors, when they go in, I say, hey, just watch the experience when you go, right? So from having kind of a concierge that coordinates everything to just your own suite, just the way the offices are set up. Could you talk about like what you're doing there and how you're just creating a different experience that people come into also?
Sure. So, as we started looking, how we are going to, get this testing improved. I mean, some of the testing can be a little bit intimidating for people who are not used to it, but we really believe that there's an opportunity to, and I did from the very beginning of when we started this, to blend hospitality and what you might find at a nice resort or a spa with healthcare. And there was really no reason that you had to sit on a sterile exam table covered in paper, kind of like you see at your veterinary's office, especially since we're not using those tools, right? So, and when you come into a fountain center, you'll find that it feels more like a spa, and
Yep.
and there's a high touch, high end service. It's not an inexpensive testing, and I will address that because what we did with our 4 Fountain Life centers, and we're going to be building more. Is create a really high end user experience, but we're really grateful to our members because they're really helping us collect the data. And also, they're going to help us get to a point where we can scale this technology to allow more and more people to have access. Because the main reason we built the company and founded the company was to fundamentally reshape healthcare, not just for the 1%, but for everybody. And in order to do that, I always tell people, we have to sell a lot of $130,000 Teslas before you can get down to a $30,000 Tesla.
Yeah.
And it's our members that are helping us do this. So number one, they're powering our algorithms. But number two, we will be, what we're trying to do is take this preventive testing also out of the 4 walls of the doctor's office and out of the 4 walls of the hospital and put it where people live. So we have initiatives now. We'll be going into country clubs. We'll be, going into high-end residential real estate, going into hotels with resorts where people live and where people can access the technology without having it behind the quote sick care system. And so as we get scale, the cost of the testing goes down over time. And
Yep.
so really that's going to be the key. And once we get the cost of these scans down to below $1,000, for all 3 scans, I think that's when things really will change. And I think we're probably within 3 to 5 years of getting to that point, but we are going to start to see price declines in the next year or so, I think.
That's cool. Well, it has been a great experience. So I would, recommend it highly for everyone. If anyone wants, they can just shoot me an email and I'll send, kind of my experience with it, or just go to your website, fountainlife.com too. So, okay, let me ask you some quick lightning round questions as we wrap up here. First one is this. COVID made, I think, a lot of people rethink maybe what they thought about life or leadership. Is there one lesson that you learned over the past few years that you think you'll carry forward for the rest of your career or life?
Well, particularly with COVID, I think, I mean, there were a lot of mistakes made with COVID. Let's face it. I mean, the vaccine while effective, it should have probably never been sold as a true vaccine. It's really a shot, right? I mean, it's like a flu shot. Doesn't mean you're not going to get it. It just means you may not die from it. It's maybe less severe. But I think we need to. I think one of the things that's a big takeaway for me, and it really put a really glaring light on the U.S. health system, is that we don't have a very healthy population in the United States. The
Good.
reason we had so many people that died from COVID was because of comorbidities, meaning other disease processes that put them at risk for not only getting the virus, but dying from the virus. So obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure. I mean, all of those things were just such a huge impact on healthcare. And I think, when we start looking at, dissecting through that, what we realize is our healthcare system is not at all geared toward health. It is really a sick care system.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, COVID really put a bright light on that for us.
Well, I think the good lesson there for everyone is like get yourself in shape. It's the best thing
Absolutely.
that you can do. So, okay, what is the one thing that you've done that has helped you graduate from being good in your profession to great?
I think being really open to new ideas and not being closed off. In medicine, we can get really closed off because we tend to be, I would say, we're the beneficiaries of our mentors and also the victims, meaning that,
Mm,
our mentors, while being very good at what they do at the state of the art, the technology is moving so fast right now. If you don't have an open mind, you're going to miss the opportunities. And also, I think that what's helped me immensely is being able to take one big step back from what I'm currently doing and trying to figure out what is the next evolution going to be
mm.
in healthcare? And really, quite frankly, the next big opportunity is what I think we're doing inside of Fountain. So I think that's been the biggest thing: open mind. And like Tony says a lot of times, it's what you read and who you hang out with. I mean, it makes an enormous difference in not only your mindset but also your willingness to look at new ideas and adopt new ways of doing things.
That's good. Well, it's kind of a transition to my third question. Like, is there something with your own personal growth and development this year that you're doing that you're excited about?
Well, every day is a new day at Fountain, as you might imagine. We
Yeah.
we see more growth inside of Fountain. I think one of the things I'm the most excited about is we finally got enough traction inside Fountain that we're going to be able to offer these diagnostic services at a lot of locations that people would heretofore not think of as medical locations, and meaning being able to embed this in a country club setting or real estate
Hmm.
setting, and this idea that your health is in your hands. We're very excited. We'll be launching a digital membership this year and an app with our members to where all their data will be theirs, in their hands. And so now, we have a digital platform that you'll have more data about your health than anyone else. And I think
That's cool.
those are like pivotal in terms of giving people insights into their own health.
That's nice. Okay, fourth question. What is the one book that you've recommended most to other leaders, entrepreneurs? Can't be your own book. I don't know if you've written one or yet. I don't remember if we
No,
talked about that. So,
I
okay,
have
so
not written
good.
one.
So just, yeah, one book that you've probably recommended most.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot that we do, but just in general, I've got a lot of Tony's books are actually the ones that I have highly recommend. Two that I do. One is that any one of Tony's books is really great. I think his personal power book has been a pivotal one for me. But then the second one is actually a book that Dr. Peter Diamandis wrote, and he wrote it several years ago. It's called Abundance, and he's got an updated version, and it really talks about the world and the technology improvements, and that even though you listen to the news, you don't be so dissuaded by how the news portrays everything is falling apart, because if you look at where we are versus where we were 100 years ago, we're so much better off. I
Yeah.
mean, we are just so much better off. And so being careful on the filter of what you allow into your brain is really important.
That's good. Well, I think with Peter and Tony involved, you're going to have lots of people pushing you to keep your mind open. Those two think pretty big. So, okay. Final question: what is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I think the best piece of advice I've ever received has probably been, uh, don't let others set your limitations.
Mm,
I think that's best advice. I mean, my grandfather told me years ago. He says, if there's something you really want to go do it, and don't let somebody else steal your dreams. And I
that's
think that's really important.
I love it. Okay, Dr. Kapp, I appreciate you taking the time again to join us, this time virtual versus in person. And just for, I think, hopefully more than anything, I hope what people take away is just kind of an eye opener of like you can control a lot of things with your health and need to be proactive. If people want to follow along with you, learn more about Fountain Life, what's the best way for them to do that?
Fountainlife.com, and then we're on all the social media channels, and you can pick up. You can sign up. There's a free newsletter, which is great, and you'll get the more updates as we launch the digital membership. Other things. There's lots of interesting things that are going on in Fountain, but we keep everybody abreast of all the latest technology.
Awesome. Well, more than anything, I hope as people listen to this that you will be proactive and take some steps to improve your health. Share this show with someone who you think this may be a subtle way for you to nudge someone along who you want to take better care of their health too. And we say all the time that we need more great leaders right now, but we also need those great leaders to last. So prioritize your health, do something proactive. And Dr. Kapp, again, I appreciate the time.
Great. Thank you, Cody. I really appreciate the time too.